Another idea is that once females have a hankering for a particular sort of hunk, this preference becomes more common, because if their sons inherit the hunkiness of their dads, they too will be favored by females. We see this in things like the stalk-eyed fly. These are eyeballs, not antennae. And this is called the sexy sons hypothesis. In this case, female preferences need to have a genetic basis, and then they spread in the population just because of selection. It's important to note that in this case, there's no link to fitness. It's not about passing good genes on to offspring. Females can prefer particular signals just because we do. I mean, that's really sexy. Actually, my favorite examples of this come from studies of traits that don't exist in nature. Nancy Burley studied finches, cute little things. And what she found, this is not a finch leg. If you know anything about birds, you're like, yeah, not exactly the same animal. When finches are wearing red leg bands for identification by Nancy, the females love them. They mate with them repeatedly. Nancy got the idea that this was happening when she examined her data, and so she went in and she took the red bands off and substituted them with other colors. And those males that had previously been the favorites of females turned instantly from studs to duds. Obviously, leg bands are not something that occurs in nature in this species, but that's not even the best one. The best one is this one. Now, finches don't have crests. They don't have, but when you put little hats on these guys, oh my God, the girls go crazy. They love this, especially if they're white. I don't know. The moral of the story is a little well-placed jewelry can go a long way. There's one final idea, and that's the choice is just about resources. But the female is choosing the male based on what she can get directly from him. This one doesn't have a cute name like sexy sons or good genes. I call it the Hugh Hefner effect. In this case, females choose mates that can provide them with resources, not because they have good genes or are sexy or anything like that. I think that describes Hugh pretty well. In cases other than Hugh's playmates, those resources, of course, would be used for the rearing of young. Sometimes there is a signal involved. So in blackbirds, males with brighter beaks, like, ooh, I gotta stop doing that, with like this one, actually, it turns out, are better dads. They put more energy into provisioning young at the nest than the ones with the lighter beaks do. So they're physically making way more trips to get food and bring it back home. And so what we see in that case is that fledglings from ones with this high bill color index are more successful. They're more likely to survive. But sometimes there is less delicate, direct bartering of food for sexual favors, like in hanging flies. In hanging flies, the male brings a dead insect to the female. It's called a nuptial gift. It's that little dead thing that she's sucking on. The larger the size of that gift, the longer she'll let him copulate with her. And that means the more sperm will get transferred to her. In one species of praying mantis, the removal of the male's head, she eats it when they are in flagrante delicto, removes his resistance to mating and leads to quite energetic thrusting and thrashing, and scientists think more sperm transfer. In this case, not only does she not love him for his brain, by the time she's done, he doesn't have one. And do I really have to say anything about our tradition of food gifts and Valentine's Day? But really, I've been talking a lot about birds and bugs. What about us? What can evolutionary biology tell us about our love lives? How much of what we know from animals can be applied to humans? The hard thing about studying humans is that not only are we more conscious of our mating decisions than most animals are, we also have control over our reproductive output. The hardest thing actually to do when studying humans is to make a direct link to fitness, because we can control whether or not we have babies, especially in the modern world. And I haven't gotten into details of experimental design with you, But most of what we know about sex in animals is from manipulative experiments, like cutting off peacocks' tails and seeing how the peahens respond. Arna mentioned that I study mating in plants, and a basic manipulation I do is I cut off their naughty bits. My husband cringes. I come home and tell him about my emasculation experiments. And clearly we're not going to be doing that on humans. Some things we're just not going to be manipulating. So manipulative experiments are out. Unlike other animals, we can actually ask people about their sex lives, though. Problem is we all lie like dogs about it. So we have to take studies that are done with questionnaires with a bit of a grain of salt, but they can provide us with some interesting insights. It's not hopeless. I'm going to show you a combination of anthropological studies and comparisons to our close relatives among the primates that can tell us quite a bit about how our sex lives have evolved. So first, which sex is likely choosier in humans? We can evaluate this, remember, by examining the variance in reproductive success. We know from the Kipsigis people in Kenya that lifetime reproductive success in females goes up to a maximum of about 10. But in males, it can be 25 or more children. I was saying ouch before? Ouch. We also can think about record holders. And examples I've been able to find included Muley Ishmael the Bloodthirsty, who had 888 children, and Magdalena Krnova, who's the female record holder at 36 children. We're not as sexually dimorphic as a gorilla, but we are sexually dimorphic. If you've been paying attention, that should give you some idea of our mating system, which I'm going to get back to later. In addition to the obvious difference in our body shapes and presence or absence of things like beards, men tend to be taller than women, although the distributions are, of course, overlapping. Several psychological studies have shown that mating is non-random for height. Although, of course, there are always exceptions, the average height difference between married couples is actually a bit less than between the Smiths here. It's usually about 3 to 4 inches. And women tend to rank tall men as more attractive than shorter men. Does this translate into greater reproductive success for taller men? Well, a study in Poland says could be. What we see here is a figure that unfortunately didn't reproduce as well as I might like, that shows men with no children in red, and it's their height that you have to be looking at, and men with at least one child in blue. And although the differences are not great, they are statistically significant for all age groups except men in their 50s. Men with children are taller than men without. What's interesting is the way the authors of this study interpreted this information about men in their 50s. Men in their 50s, when this study was done, would have entered the marriage market right after World War II. And during that time, the sex ratio of women to men in Poland was 114 women for every 100 men. The idea here is that because so many young men died in the war, the women could not be choosy. And in case you're wondering, during the other decades, the sex ratio was closer to 104 women to every 100 men. Larger size in human males suggests that sometimes, as in other species, male fighting ability may be important in acquiring or keeping mates. One study of the Yanomamo, a pre-modern society in the Amazon, suggests that there has been selection for aggression. These people take pride in their ferocity. About 25% of adult male mortality is due to homicide. And about 40% of the men in Chagnon's sample here had participated in a homicide. Yanomamo call men who have killed unukai. Unukais, shown in the dark blue, have more, oh, my axes are wrong. They're gone. This is supposed to be number of wives, and this is supposed to be number of children. So men who have committed at least one homicide have both more wives and more children than men who have not. What about the Hefner effect? My favorite. In both a study of hunter-gatherers, and again, we've lost our axes, I'm sorry. In a study of hunter-gatherers and also in 16th and 15th century Poland, we see a difference in what this should be is number of children between men with high resource status and low resource status. So what we have here are poor hunters shown in the darker color, good hunters in the lighter color. The good hunters have more offspring. And what these axes are supposed to be is these are untitled men like the military, landed men, aristocracy, and royalty. So those poor untitled men leave behind fewer offspring than those with titles or those that are royal.